Absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Sarah Klein, who is the CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation of Colorado and Wyoming. Sarah has been the CEO since 2017, and the Epilepsy Foundation of Colorado and Wyoming represents the nearly 65,000 people, probably more now, Sarah, living with epilepsy across the region. Under Sarah's leadership, the foundation expanded its programming to include a dedicated mental health program manager, first ever symposium on cannabis and epilepsy, very interesting, and hired a bilingual program manager to ensure accessibility to the Spanish-speaking community. Prior to this role, Sarah served in a variety of national strategic funding positions at the National Multiple Sclerosis Society and was involved in community engagement at the American Red Cross. Very impressive background. So Sarah, we're delighted to have you here. We're really honored to be able to represent neurodiversity in so many different ways. And I think a lesser understood aspect of neurodivergent individuals is those who do live with epilepsy. So I know there's been very, very large interest in this topic. So I'm going to stop talking now and let you take over. Thank you all. Sarah, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. It's lovely to be here. I so appreciate this invitation, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit more about epilepsy and neurodiversity. I want to make sure you can see my screen before I kind of jump in. Are you seeing yes, thumbs up. Great. Well, thank you. So I'm thrilled to be here today. Again, thank you so much for this invitation and looking forward to a great conversation. So that's me, Sarah Klein, and this is just a little bit what I'm going to talk about today. So epilepsy and neurodiversity in general, and then I'll just give a bit of an intro to epilepsy. I'm not sure that everyone in this community knows much about it. So I want to chat a little bit about that. And then obviously the CNDCC is focused on employment for people in the neurodiversity space. So I'll be talking a little bit about epilepsy in the workplace, just a quick tip on seizure first aid, and then tell you a little bit about our organization. So just to get started with epilepsy and neurodiversity. So as we know, the term neurodiversity describes a wide range of neurocognitive variation and recognize that everybody's brain develops and behaves a little bit differently. Epilepsy, I think, doesn't always come immediately to mind when people think about neurodiversity. But like many other conditions, epilepsy boils down to an atypical functioning of the brain. And we like to say that epilepsy often brings a friend. So there are a lot of comorbidities with, in particular, autism, but in other mental health and brain-related functions. So wanting to make sure that everyone understands that epilepsy sort of deserves a place in the neurodiversity ecosphere, and appreciate mentra.com for their definitions here on the screen. So in that vein, let's talk about what is epilepsy. If you don't know what epilepsy is, or if you are curious about how we define epilepsy, basically epilepsy is a brain disorder that causes recurring unprovoked seizures. So a doctor might diagnose you with epilepsy if you've had 2 unprovoked seizures, or if you've had 1 seizure and have a tendency or a high risk of having more. Unprovoked seizure means there's no direct cause. So there's such a thing as a provoked seizure, which is a symptom of something else, right? So you are kicked in the head by a horse, or in alcohol withdrawal or something like that can cause a provoked seizure, but unprovoked means there's no immediate cause. So this word epilepsy basically means the same thing as a seizure disorder and covers a wide variety of what seizures can look like. Some little known facts, maybe. 1 in 10 people over the course of their lifetime will have a seizure, and 1 in 26 will be diagnosed with epilepsy. That is more common than autism, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and cerebral palsy combined. And yet with all of that, the prevalence of that, epilepsy receives much less in terms of research funding and I think awareness than a lot of those other conditions. Again, another reason I'm delighted to have a chance to speak with you guys today. So who can get epilepsy? Well, anyone can get epilepsy. 1 in 26 of us will be diagnosed over the course of a lifetime. It's the 4th most common neurological condition and affects 65 million people around the world. Seizures can develop in any person at any age. Right now, at this point, seizures are starting for the first time in people aged 65 and up, almost as often as it is diagnosed in children. Seizures in the elderly are often caused by other health problems like a stroke or heart disease or something like that, but high rates of diagnosis in the later years as well. Epilepsy is not rare, and like I said before, can be seen as a single condition or can co-occur with other conditions like cerebral palsy or intellectual disability, autism, and other conditions. So the brain is the source of epilepsy. Any brain can have a seizure. All brain functions depend on electrical signals passed between nerve cells in the brain. And a seizure is a disruption of those typical or normal electrical communications. So we all have a seizure threshold, and anyone can cross that threshold, again, whether that's provoked or when people with epilepsy, unprovoked. So here's a bunch of numbers for you, and I'm not going to run through all of them because it's a lot to digest. But again, there's 65,000-ish people in Colorado and Wyoming. That's the territory that we serve. 65,000 people diagnosed with epilepsy, which is a lot. I want to particularly draw your attention to the data here, or the numbers that I have in bold, which is really the cause of our conversation today. And that's around epilepsy and employment. So the unemployment rate for people with epilepsy has been reported to be between 25 and 69% based on whichever study you read. That's extremely high, especially compared to the general population. 30% of people with epilepsy don't gain full control of their seizures with medication or with surgery or other therapeutic approaches. So still continue to struggle day to day with seizures or the threat of an imminent seizure. 29% of adults with epilepsy can't use a car or public transit to get places versus only 8% without epilepsy. Now, this is for a variety of reasons. Some people can't drive if they're having active seizures. Obviously, they're not driving. But this also has to do with access to public transportation in rural or underserved areas. But again, I think just goes to show that there is a cascade here that is so important and that we can't ignore, which is that, a lower high school graduation rate, a lower employment rate leads to more people in poverty, people unable to afford their medications, lack of access to health insurance, those sorts of things. So because again, as we know and appreciate that the CNDCC is focused on furthering opportunities for people with neurodiversity or neurodivergent individuals, we want them to excel in the workforce, in business and leadership. Again, just really grateful that epilepsy can have some visibility in this conversation. So talking then about epilepsy in the workplace, to clear up any misconceptions that may exist, people with epilepsy, in general, can do the exact same things that people without epilepsy can do. Some people who struggle with frequent seizures may not be able to work, may not be able to drive, may need accommodations in the workplace. But in general, people with epilepsy can handle jobs with responsibility, with stress. People with epilepsy are found in all walks of life. Half of our staff here at the Epilepsy Foundation are individuals living with epilepsy, and we're so grateful because they are incredible contributors to our work and to our mission. And if there are people who have seizures brought about by stress, yes, of course, we need to deal with stress, but I think all of us have to deal with stress, so that's not unique. So I want to say, if you have epilepsy, it's not always necessary. I'm talking from sort of like a disclosure point of view, not always necessary to discuss epilepsy with a potential employer. But if you do, we want to give some just tips and support thing. The important thing is not whether you talk about it, but whether you actually can do the job that you're being hired to do. I would say we encourage people to consider sharing their epilepsy status and a seizure action plan with someone at work, so people know how to help if you do have a seizure. But in speaking with an employer or with your colleagues, we suggest or encourage people to explain how long you've had epilepsy. Is it controlled? Are you seizure-free? What do your seizures look like? If you've never had a convulsive seizure, mention that as well. I think there are some misconceptions about what seizures look like. They're not always convulsive, right? So if you're having a different kind of seizure, it can be helpful to explain to your colleagues what that looks like so that they know what's happening and know how to respond. But regardless of what you decide to do, your employer is required to make reasonable accommodations for you in the workplace. So if you hire someone with epilepsy and someone with epilepsy chooses to disclose their condition to you, there may be reasonable modifications that should be made. And a reasonable modification is basically changes to how the business operates or the policies or a practice that accommodates the person with disabilities with epilepsy and enables them to access their workplace and their job responsibilities with minimal disruption to the company, of course. And accommodations, often are on a case-by-case basis. Not all seizures look the same. Not all people have the same effect or impact. And so the accommodation can be different from person to person. So someone who has memory problems or side effects from medications may need instructions or directions to be written down so that they can refer back to them. If someone is changing medications and maybe is having breakthrough seizures or is having some other issues, they may need flexible hours so that they can take a break or things like that. If someone is, again, not driving, they may need the accommodation of work from home or access to public transportation or things like that.
Sarah, do you
Again,
mind If I interrupt really quickly with a related question, I
Absolutely.
do have a couple of questions that we can address at the very end. Marcella, your questions are wonderful. I'll address the more medical one at the very end, I think. But Marcella asked about driving specifically. Is there a standard measurement to assess whether a person is fit to drive, even if they have a history? If they have a history of seizure, even if they have only experienced a seizure once?
That is a great question. And I don't personally have a great answer to that one. That is something that is between the individual and their healthcare provider. Colorado, as a state, does not have a law around seizures and driving. And so you can't just sort of refer to the state statutes on who is and who isn't allowed to drive. But that's really honestly on a case-by-case basis with the healthcare provider, with the doctor, and they are the ones to make that determination of, even if it's only been one seizure, how likely are you to have another one? Is there a risk, a higher risk to have a second seizure? If someone's on medication, how long have they been seizure-free? Those sorts of things are taken into consideration. So there isn't like a hard and fast rule that says, if you've been seizure-free for 90 days, you can definitely drive. That is something that is much more on a case-by-case basis with the provider. Thanks. Yeah, happy to keep taking questions as we go. That's great.
Thank you.
This is a fun little graphic that I pulled off of the Mentor.com website, which is just some inclusion essentials. If you're thinking about if you have a colleague or an employee who's living with epilepsy, some of the accommodations and inclusion way to make people feel welcome and to enable them to do their job effectively. I won't read through all of these, but I think it's nice to just think about the social ways of including people. So if someone needs to go off of camera, or if there's again ways to educate the team about seizure first aid and that sort of thing. So speaking of which, if you have a colleague with epilepsy, so maybe you're not the employer, maybe you're not the employee, but maybe you are the colleague of someone, or even the friend, let's just be honest, or the family member, how can you be a supportive colleague or friend or family member? First of all, I would say just learn about epilepsy. So welcome to the Learning About Epilepsy opportunity. And there are many more ways to learn about epilepsy. Respect confidentiality. Of course, like any other health condition, it's important to let the person to disclose on their own if they want to. It's not our place to tell other people's story for them. Be flexible with accommodations if your colleague needs, needs a rest or needs low lights or needs other things, like just as we would accommodate anyone with their special needs. Understanding the seizure action plan. So a seizure action plan is usually a written document that just says, here's what my seizures look like and here's what to do. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in another couple of minutes, but people who have unique seizures or, in a situation where other people don't have a lot of familiarity, it's great to have a seizure action plan just so that someone around you can say, oh yeah, I know what to do. I know how to help. I know how to help this person get through it. And then learning seizure first aid. So we actually do a seizure first aid certification, kind of like the Red Cross first aid certification. It's seizure first aid. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well, but that is a great way to just be prepared to support, whether it's your colleague or, again, with 1 in 10 people having a seizure at some point in their life, chances are very good that in some setting in your life, you are going to witness someone having a seizure. So since we're on that topic, let's talk about quick first aid for seizures. Again, we offer a full certification on this, but everybody should know the basics. And the basics are, most seizures are not emergencies. The vast majority of seizures resolve on their own and don't need any kind of intervention other than helping the person stay safe. So we use 3 words to remember what to do in the event of a seizure: stay, safe, and side. So stay is stay with the person, don't leave them on their own, stay with them, stay calm. Safe is keep them safe. So if someone is having a convulsive seizure, so they are perhaps on the floor having convulsions, keep them safe from sharp objects, right? Remove, if they've got constrictive clothing on, help loosen their clothing, keep them safe from harm. Some people who may be having a non-convulsive but unaware seizure, who could be wandering without a great awareness, help keep them safe, away from, don't walk into traffic or don't fall down the stairs or that sort of thing, but keep them safe. And then turn them on their side. If someone is not conscious and is perhaps having a convulsive seizure, we recommend turning them on their side in case of any excess saliva, just so someone doesn't choke. Don't ever put something in people's mouth. That is an old wives' tale. No offense to old wives, but we don't do that. Don't put something in their mouth. Don't try to hold down or restrain the person. That can cause more harm than good. And unless you are a trained caregiver or healthcare provider, don't try to give someone oral anti-seizure medication. Most emergency medications now are nasally administered, but putting something in someone's mouth is not a good idea. So again, most seizures should resolve within 5 minutes. If it doesn't resolve in 5 minutes, that's when it becomes, we need to take more actions. So, in general, we don't need to call 911. It's not an emergency, but if that seizure does last longer than 5 minutes, or if you know the person and you know their seizures, which always last longer than 5 minutes, if it's longer than normal, but generally say if it's more than 5 minutes, that's when it could be an emergency. So we recommend do call 911 if that seizure is more than 5 minutes. If another seizure starts, one seizure resolves and then another one starts before the person regains consciousness, or if there are other things happening, if the person is injured, if the person is pregnant, if the seizure happened in the water, or if the person is not recovering appropriately, if they're not returning to normal breathing, if they're not regaining full awareness, that's when we get concerned that it might need additional medical intervention. So at that point, we call 911. So that's the basics of seizure first aid, and I'll offer you opportunities to learn more about that a little bit later. But that's the summary at this point for the kind of general epilepsy awareness. I want to tell you a little bit about what we do at the Epilepsy Foundation. So we sum up our mission in 3 words: we connect, educate, and empower to improve the lives of everyone impacted by epilepsy. So we connect those nearly 65,000 people. We connect people to healthcare providers, to resources, to information, to each other through peer support and social activities. We educate in things like this. We do an annual symposium. We do seizure first aid trainings. We do ongoing webinars on epilepsy. We offer resources on our website, and we empower people with information, knowledge, resources so they can make the best healthcare decisions for themselves or for their loved one. We empower through advocacy. We're active in the state legislature to ensure that the rights of people with disabilities and chronic conditions are represented, and ultimately do these things to help people live the best possible life. A few of the samplings of our programs and services I mentioned on the education piece, that symposium. If you're interested in learning more about epilepsy, our annual symposium is April 27th, so coming up pretty soon. We would love to have you there. It's being held in person at Swedish Medical Center. Seizure first aid certification, like I mentioned, we offer these on-demand and live webinars ongoing, which are about seizure recognition, how to recognize and how to respond appropriately to seizures. We'd love to have you join us at a future training. A variety of connection and support programs that we offer just so that people don't have to walk through that epilepsy journey alone. We're here to provide help and support. We're also here to provide connections to other people who know what you are going through. We've got a great suite of camps and retreats for kids, through young adults, through families, where we bring people together for fun and adventure, but also transitioning to independence. And again, building those real important peer and community relationships. And then we have a number of mental health resources. Like I mentioned before, epilepsy often brings a friend, and that friend is often mental health challenges. So there's a very high rate of depression and anxiety in people with epilepsy. And again, we want to be here to help people walk through that together so that you're not dealing with seizures and depression all on your own. So those are a few of the things that we offer in that space. And I will just mention that coming soon, this is still in the works, no pun intended, but we do those earlier stats that I mentioned about the challenges and higher rates of under and unemployment for people with epilepsy. We're very interested in that and the role that we can play, obviously in partnership with organizations like the CNDCC and other groups who are supporting people with disabilities or other challenges in the workplace. We're looking to see what our role can be in the epilepsy community specifically. So more to come. Again, we've got quotes around the name Epilepsy Works, I think is clever, but more to come on that. But again, we so see the opportunities there are for employers to include people with epilepsy in their workplace and for people with epilepsy to find meaningful and fulfilling work. So if any of this is interesting to you and you want to get more involved, just a few opportunities. Again, learn seizure first aid, come to our symposium, join a committee or volunteer with us. There's always opportunities to get involved. Participate in an event. We host the Walk to End Epilepsy, which is the largest gathering of the epilepsy community in the region. That's coming up. The Denver one is in June, and then our other events in the fall. Epilepsy Awareness Day, Purple Day, is March 26th. So put on a purple shirt and spread epilepsy awareness on that day or the whole month of November. And then, of course, I wouldn't be a good nonprofit representative if I didn't say you can also make a donation to help support our work. So again, we would love to get to know you, love to involve you in our programs and events and help continue to educate and raise awareness. So I think that's the end of my slides. I got through these pretty quickly, but would love to answer any questions or have any further conversation that might be helpful.
Yeah, and Sarah, I'll start with A question from Marcella, a comment from Sal, and then I do have some discussion that I'd love to get with you in terms of some of the crossover between neurodivergent presentations and things like that. So first of all, Marcella, thanks for your questions. Sarah, do you know of any recent improvements in medical technology or research to know if a person is having a mid-temporal lobe seizure? And maybe you can provide some context around that question, or maybe Marcella can provide some context around that question too.
Yeah, well, so I think the context around the question is seizures are abnormal electrical discharges in the brain, right? And depending on what part of the brain it either starts from or goes to, that will determine what the seizure looks like and how, how severe it is, how quickly it passes, that sort of thing. I don't know offhand about specifically that type of seizure or that type of epilepsy and the medical advances specifically for that. I will say that there is a lot of research being done, both in terms of pharmaceutical options as well as medical devices that can help with seizures. So there are obviously a large range of medications available for people with epilepsy, which is both good and bad. It's good because no two people's courses of epilepsy are exactly the same. And so there are a lot of options for people. Many people take one and then maybe two and then maybe a third medication before they get to that optimal sort of seizure control. If medications don't work or people prefer other options, there are medical devices that can help manage epilepsy. So there is something called a vagus nerve stimulator, which is kind of like a pacemaker, but for your vagus nerve. And that's the big nerve that runs up your neck into your brain. So that device actually attaches to the vagus nerve and sends kind of calming electrical impulses and can also detect a seizure and interrupt that with some electrical activity. There are two implantable brain devices, one called the responsive neurostimulator and one called the deep brain stimulator or deep brain stimulation. Those are both have electrical leads that go implanted directly into the brain that again can help monitor for seizure activity and can help interrupt that when it's happening. So long answer is lots of things going on in terms of research and development to help people with seizures.
Thank you. Marcella, does that answer that question?
Yes and no. So thank you anyway for both of you responding and asking. So my daughter has a rare disease. There's no fancy name. 7 people in the world have been identified. There's a lot they don't know, but the one doctor always said, I suspect there's a temporal lobe seizure happening, but there's no way to measure it. So that always makes me wonder, because there's so many things we don't know and understand about her, is how do we even know? And if we suspect, are there any guidelines about what to do or not to do? I mean, she's taken a lot of medications for a lot of different things, but it's all related to her rare disease.
Has she had an EEG?
A long time ago, and we're talking, she's now turning 22. The EEG was probably when she was around 3 or 4.
Okay, so that is, I think, probably the thing to recommend is to have another EEG done, because that is that's an electroencephalogram, if you don't know what those letters stand for, and that is where they attach a bunch of leads to the head and can measure the electrical activity happening throughout the brain, and that can help narrow down where those seizures are coming from. So instead of, I think if it was 15 or 20 years ago, that I'm sure that technology has advanced significantly. So that may be a great way for her healthcare providers to help really identify where is the source of these seizures.
That's great. Thank you for the guidance.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Just a comment from Sal as well. The Secretary of State, so this, and Sal, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned that this is specifically the case in Illinois. So the Secretary of State gives you this is related to driving, I should preface by saying. The Secretary of State gives you a form that your neurologist has to fill out. You have to be able to prove you haven't gotten a seizure in over a year. You also have to get blood tests to prove that you're currently taking your medication, and your license span is reduced from the usual 5 years or more to every 2 years. And Sal specified that this is the case in Illinois. Sal also specified that Sal's license got suspended after a seizure while driving, and this is the process that Sal had to go through.
Yeah, that sounds very comprehensive, I guess, in terms of a management process. Again, there isn't a specific strict law in the state of Colorado about how that works, but it is up to the individual and their healthcare provider to determine when they can return to driving.
Thank you. And actually, Marcella linked some information on on your Epilepsy Foundation website as well about driver information by state, which I think is really helpful. Sarah, I wanted to ask a question, kind of more of a discussion topic. You know, we're talking about epilepsy as lesser known, like when we think about neurodiversity. You know, obviously we know we had a lot of questions at the start of the Chamber of Commerce on what is neurodiversity, and people think, you know, autism and ADHD and even, you know, dyslexia, things like that. When we start talking about things like epilepsy, and even, you know, people are like, oh, when they realize that brain injury is included in that. What do you see as the most common intersections between other kind of identifications of neurodiversity plus epilepsy? And for those of you who don't know, I'm the CEO of Firefly Autism, as well as the co-founder of the Chamber of Commerce, which is such an honor. But I've worked with a lot of autistic adults and teens who also have diagnosis of epilepsy. And I mentioned in the chat, I've worked with a few people who have vagus nerve stimulators. Can you kind of speak to that overlap a little bit more? And I'm sorry to throw like a million questions at you, but I'm also super interested in the incidences of depression and anxiety among people with epilepsy.
Yeah, well, I think all of those speak to the same kind of underlying issue, is that there's something in the brain is happening atypically, right? And epilepsy is, you know, the electrical impulse is happening atypically, but that's sort of like the overexcitability piece that is, I think, linked with the autistic brain, right? So there's something happening there that is a little too much, right? A little too much electricity, a little too much what have you. I think the stats are that something like almost half of people with autism will also have an epilepsy diagnosis. So very high coincidence of those two conditions. And I think for mental health, it's something like 60% of people with epilepsy will have some mental health challenge or diagnosis as well, depression, anxiety, or in some cases much more severe. You know, it seems to, again, I'm not the medical professional in the room, but when something goes a little bit haywire with the brain, it seems to bring some friends, right? It seems to like affect more than just you know, a seizure, right? Or more than just a different way of processing, sensory processing, and things like that. So yeah, there is extremely, you know, a lot of overlap, and because seizures can look like a lot of different things, seizures can look like, you know, I'll say that the common perception of seizures is that it's a fall down on the floor, full body convulsions of seizures, which is certainly one type. It used to be called a grand mal seizure. We call it a tonic-clonic seizure now. But again, as I said earlier, depending on where in the brain and to what extent these electrical misfirings are happening, seizures can look like brief staring spells. They can look like muscle twitching. They can look like, you know, all kinds of different things. And so when someone is having, you know, both the sort of staring kind of seizure and is having you know, maybe has an autism diagnosis, these things get kind of muddied. Like, what am I seeing here right now? Is this someone who's having trouble, you know, focusing and concentrating? Am I seeing someone who's actually having a seizure? So there is, I think, a lot of kind of murky space in there with, you know, people who are living with multiple diagnoses.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important thing, and obviously why we're all here today, it's a really important thing to highlight, because the more that we can talk about things like this, the more we can advance, you know, more questions that we can ask, the more we can highlight some of these issues, right? So the issue of misinterpretation, or the issue of stereotyping, or the issue of not really, if there's a gray area, that might be an issue, right? So I think it's really valuable to hear your thoughts on that. Yale has a question, and then I have endless questions for you, so I do have another one, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance as well. So at what age do most people get diagnosed with epilepsy?
Yeah, great question. So it's kind of a upside down bell curve. So many people are diagnosed with epilepsy very early on in life. You know, seizures are sort of recognized and understood, you know, in the first, let's say, 5 years of life. And then less common through sort of middle, you know, high school, middle, early adulthood, not never, but less common. And then it jumps up again around age 65. So just like other neurological issues, like let's say Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease, which maybe are caused by some sort of structural changes or deterioration in the brain, those things can also cause seizures. So we see another kind of uptick in the diagnosis later in life.
Thank you so much. I do have another question, but does anybody else have a question before me? Because I've just been thinking about this session for such a long time. I think I've had a lot of time to think about my questions.
I have a question. Do you mind if I jump in?
Please.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm actually on the board at the foundation, and I have a child who's autistic, nonverbal, and has epilepsy. So I come at this from that, but I'm also a business owner and an employer. And so, first of all, great job, Sarah. Thank you for sharing so much good information. But I'm curious because I'm new. I'm new to this group. As far as navigating, like if you had an employee who has epilepsy, to me, I think of it as from a parent, I want that person to be safe. And part of that being safe in that space, in that public space, in their workspace is their coworkers, the administrative staff, the people that are around them having seizure safety training, knowing what their seizures look like, all of those things. But I know people have different levels of comfort in sharing that information. So I'm just curious to hear more if you've thought about it, Sarah, or if others have. Like, how do we navigate these conversations with employees to make sure, like, this is a supportive environment? I'm not trying to get into your personal business. You don't have to tell anyone anything. And I want to make sure we're all able to support you and keep you safe. And if you were to have a seizure, like, wouldn't you want us all to know what to? So how do we navigate those tricky conversations as employers?
Nice to have you here, Rachel. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. Great question. And I'm going to take kind of just a quick step back and say sort of how we've addressed this in a different space. And then I'll talk about how we might address this in the workplace. But in 2021, so a few years ago now, we helped pass a law in Colorado. It's Joey's Law, which requires that all public schools in the state of Colorado have at least one adult, at least one employee who is trained in seizure recognition and first aid. So every public school in Colorado now has someone who knows how to recognize and respond appropriately to a seizure. And that, I think, kind of heads off your question, sort of heads it off at the pass, right? So we've made it so that there's already in every school someone who knows what to do, someone who knows how to help, someone who knows how to keep a student safe, someone who knows that sort of basic response. And so we don't necessarily have to have those tricky conversations if the student doesn't want to tell their teacher or tell their friends. We've sort of made almost kind of a workaround because we've already made it so that there's someone who knows what to do. And I think that's an opportunity that we have in the workplace as well. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to try to get a law passed that says every business has to do seizure first aid training. But if an employer had this on their radar, I mean, I think it would be amazing if every company in Colorado, just as a standard practice, did an annual seizure first aid training for their staff. Again, epilepsy is so common. And with the numbers are about 60% of people have their seizures under control, are controlled with medication or through other therapies. You very well know and work with somebody who has epilepsy, and you just might not know it. They might not have told you. So I think as a matter of course, having companies, businesses, whatever, do this training as a matter of course, so that should someone not want to disclose, but then have a seizure at work, people are already, this is already on people's radar. They already know what to do. I think that would be amazing. And I think, again, if somebody doesn't want to disclose to their employer particularly or doesn't want that to be publicly known, sure, like if you work in a company, go to your HR department and suggest, hey, what if our company did a seizure first aid training just in case anybody might ever be diagnosed with epilepsy? I think that could be a potential avenue.
Great, thank you. Yeah, make it less personal. It's just like we're all aware, regardless of who the person is. Yeah, love that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I think something that you said there really struck me. When you said, don't worry, I'm not going to try and get a law passed. I think that the reason why we sometimes say things like that is because we are aware that adding something additional to the employer's plate can be difficult. And I would counter that to say, however, as we strive for equity as a whole, I think that there is going to be a necessity to have some responsibility on the part of the employer as well. And for decades, it's been on the employee, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I'm the employee, I'm neurodivergent. What do I have to do? I have to mask. I have to, decide whether I'm going to disclose or not. And then the employee is the one that's kind of taken all of the responsibility. And part of what we're doing with the Chamber of Commerce, and I know that you guys are doing as well, is that has to go both sides, right? We have to shift some of that responsibility to the employer. So we don't necessarily want to be afraid to say to employers, there might be there's definitely some onus on you to learn about these things. And hey, maybe in 10 years' time, there will be a law that says that you need to do a training on epilepsy. And I'm going to tell you, it shocked me. Your statistic of the number of people who are diagnosed with epilepsy absolutely shocked me. I can't believe it. I think about autism like 1 in 36. Oh my gosh, this is even more than that. So, there's something to be said for if you're talking about, a fifth of the population, or even, for all 20% of your workforce. Let's say you have 100 employees. So maybe there is something to be said for more legislative action on creating responsibility on the employer. Do you have any kind of more thoughts on that, especially if you think about how both the Epilepsy Foundation and the Chamber of Commerce move forward with educating employers?
Yeah, well, you made such a good point, Amanda, and I so appreciate that, because you're absolutely right. We should not be afraid to ask employers, individuals, whatever, to be more inclusive, right? And to be more accommodating and to be more supportive of people with, neurodivergent conditions. So I really appreciate that. We when we did this in the schools, we got some initial pushback because teachers, God bless them, do a lot already, right? There are so many trainings and so many requirements, and they've got a lot to do. And so to add, and again, it's not to every teacher, but to add something additional that has to be done felt just hard, which we completely appreciate. But the bigger picture was understood and accepted, right? That we want to make schools safe and accommodating and, reduce the stigma, raise the awareness of, like you're saying, how common this is, reduce the stigma around it so that people aren't afraid to talk about it or afraid to tell their teachers or their friends or whatever. And I think the same is absolutely true for adults in the workplace too, right? I think any employer wants their employees to be safe, to feel welcome and understood, to, have their workplace accommodation needs met. I think you're right. We should not assume that would not be welcomed. So, I definitely think that there's work to be done. And I think this is a great place to start, right? I know that the membership of the chamber is a long list of high profile employers in the area, and if every single one of those companies who was one of your members said, we're going to do future first aid training for our employees. I mean, what an amazing place to start that would be, right? To have those group of companies to sort of step up to that as members of the chamber.
Yeah, and even and just the awareness and understanding, like being open to having the conversation is a great start. Yeah.
I have one quick comment. I've worked in public schools before, and I have to say, any kind of training like that we would get, I always felt was really helpful. It helped me feel more secure, that I could handle the situation appropriately. Let me know that the children there are going to be safe, that I can help them. But also, I feel that when teachers and paras and everybody else that's working in a school can respond confidently and get things, just taken care of, like it's not a big deal and this is what we do, I think it lets everybody else there, all the kids there, see like, oh, okay, it's not a big, scary thing. And so I think having it in the workplace too, in the same way, would also be very, very helpful for the population at large as well. And I would feel valued as an employee getting that information so that I can help my coworkers.
Yeah. One thing we love about this happening in the schools is exactly what you just said, is that this now becomes a normal topic of conversation, right? So, and now we've got this sort of younger generation of kids who are growing up in the school system who are now familiar with epilepsy, right? Who know that their teachers care. And so I think that just level of like increasing awareness. So in 10 years, when they're all now employees at future businesses and that sort of thing, it would be normal for the same thing to be happening there, right? So I feel like we're sort of making steps in that direction of, again, raising the general awareness, reducing that stigma, and making epilepsy sort of just another thing to talk about or to experience, or just another way to support your colleagues or your friends or whatever. So yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you for what you said about being, in the schools. I agree. Our teachers, our school administrators, those people, again, the best of the best people who want nothing more than to take good care of, the children or the young people in their classrooms or in their schools. So I think you're right. People value the opportunity to learn more so that they can be good teachers, good parents, good caregivers, whatever it is. Other questions from anyone?
I have a question about the chamber, again, coming from the direction of an employer. I had an experience where I was interviewing and I had my Epilepsy Foundation of Colorado Wyoming cup on my desk, and that I was drinking water out of during the day. And one of the guys I was interviewing saw it, and he just had this moment and decided he could disclose to me that the reason he had a big gap on his resume was because he had had brain surgery related to epilepsy. And he opened up to me. He explained that he's never told anyone about this in an interview. It was really powerful, and it like changed the whole dynamic of the interview. Unfortunately, he did not end up being the right candidate for that position. He was overqualified for what I was hiring for. But I'm just wondering, are there ways that we as employers should be signaling to current employees or employees we're trying to hire that like this is a safe space for you to be open about your challenges, your need for accommodations? That was such a simple thing to do. Now I'm like, yes, I'm always going to have that on my desk when I'm interviewing. But like, are there other tools or suggestions that the chamber would make, or Sarah, that you would make, that we could sort of encourage, like you're saying, like in the schools, that it's normal? This is not something you have to hide. This is, you certainly can, but you don't have to.
Yeah, thanks a million, Rachel. It's a really, really good question. And unsurprisingly, not the first time that we've been asked that question. So I'll kind of give a bit of kind of a broader outline. So the first thing that employers need to do is walk the walk when it comes to equity and removal of access barriers to jobs, right? So again, we started the Chamber of Commerce, I think it's 17 months ago now, not that I'm counting, but it's about 17 months ago. And the number of times I got asked, what's neurodiversity? It could have been hundreds of times a week. I'm not even joking. We have done like so much work around education, and we're extremely grateful, to Sarah's point, that we have about 90 companies in Colorado now who not only know about us but are actually members, who also not only know what neurodiversity is but understand all of the affiliations of neurodivergent conditions or otherwise, basically knowing not only what neurodiversity is but what it looks like, and so that it includes things like significant depression, anxiety, or epilepsy, or brain injury, or ADHD, autism, etc. The next step beyond that, so from our perspective, you have to be willing to have the conversation. Step one, if you're an employer and you're not willing to have the conversation, the prospective employees and your current employees, who by the way are great referral sources for you, they know that you've never talked about neurodiversity as an employer, you're not willing to have the conversation, and you're not actively showing any way that you're an inclusive employer in that realm, right? Because diversity, equity, and inclusion has classically just been about certain things, but what we're saying is, like, if you're inclusive of certain minds, then you're all inclusive. So I think that's step one. And then beyond that, we think about very practical steps. Look at your job descriptions. What is your job description? Literally, if you're posting a job description for a job, what is your job description saying about you as a company? Are you really making sure that you're being an inclusive employer for the job that's being done? If you're putting things like must have excellent communication skills for every single job, even if you don't have to have excellent communication skills, then you're putting an access barrier in place instantly, and employers don't realize that. So it's kind of that, awareness of all of the things, and then really being thoughtful about how you post for jobs, how you